Hi friends, welcome back. Thank you so much for clicking. One of the things I learned in early sobriety was to help the next struggling alcoholic and to give to them what was so freely given to me. And one way I can do that is to share my story. And hopefully you've heard me say this before. Hopefully there's one thing that resonates with you, or there's one small thing that you can relate to. So today I am sharing my story with you. It may be in two parts, depending on how long-winded I am and how much I talk, but my story through active alcoholism and my journey through recovery. So here is my story for you. So I do want to share as much as possible and be 100% truthful, which I will be, but I do have to be conscious of time also. So, my childhood was good. My parents are hardworking people. I grew up in a small town. Some of you know that. Some of you are from the same town. But, I come from a background of hardworking people. We are a middle-class family, and my parents did the best they can, and I had a great childhood. There is no trauma or no abuse or no chaotic childhood to speak of. That is not part of my story. For me, my upbringing and the way I was raised did not play a factor or did not contribute to my alcoholism, in my opinion. From an early age, I can remember always feeling sort of just outcast or away from the group or the normal or the regular people. I always just feel or remember feeling that I didn't fit in, and I wasn't sure what that was or why, but I just remember always stepping back and sort of not being a part of the group. One thing that does stand out in this time of my life, and I can still remember it clear as day, is when I was 10 years old. I came home from school one day and my parents sat me on the couch in between the two of them, and they told me they were getting divorced. And just the word divorce, I think at the time was so heavy for a 10-year-old. And, it was something for me at the time. It was just another thing that made me feel different, and another thing that sort of added to the thought of me not fitting in. Now, I will say that my parents did an amazing job of making life the same and working together. They lived about 2 blocks from one another, and in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really change our childhood. But in my mind, and the thoughts of a 10-year-old, it was sort of devastating to me at the time. I'm naturally sort of effeminate, and I always have been. So I did get bullied from an early age. It wasn't extreme or physical necessarily, but I went to school every day just anticipating some sort of verbal abuse or bullying in some way. mostly from the boys in my class, mostly from the popular guys. As we got older, it tended to be the jocks or the athletes that tended to do the bullying. Again, I don't blame anyone's actions as contributing to my alcoholism. This is simply part of my story. I am gay, and I think for me, that was a part of that not fitting in, and I didn't necessarily know what that was or what that meant, of course, at an early age in elementary school. I think even in early junior high, until, puberty and you start to have sexual feelings. So I recognized that in myself, but it certainly wasn't something at that point that I was going to share with anyone. Being from a small town and being a natural introvert and sort of always keeping these feelings and internalizing things, that's just something I was going to keep to myself for the time being. So other than what I mentioned, I had a fairly normal adolescence. I was a fairly good student, and moving on into high school, I think you probably heard me mention in the video with my mom, being from a small town, it kind of was the thing that you did. Unfortunately, was to start drinking at an early age. And I knew that, and I sort of was anticipating that in my early high school years. And sure enough, I, to this day, can remember my first drink. I can remember where I was. I can remember the taste of it, how it made me feel. And when it was over, I couldn't wait to do it again. So I began thinking and drinking alcoholically from the first drink that I had. It was Boone's Strawberry Farm. I was in a dorm room at Ohio University. I was funny. People were laughing at me. I let my guard down. I felt a part of the group. I felt included. And like I said, I couldn't wait to do it again. Even though I woke up with a horrible hangover, the worst headache of my life, and feeling like absolute shit, I was excited and couldn't wait for the next time. I was a junior in high school and, like I said, was away from home, visiting a college campus. So returning home, it was a little more strategic as far as the planning of getting the alcohol, where we were going to drink, what we were going to do. But it certainly was a weekly, if not a daily thought, even as a 17-year-old. It was always the next party. It was always the next get together. It was, who could I make laugh this time? Who could I make friends with this time? Who never spoke to me before and perhaps bullied me in the past? We were friends now. They thought I was funny. They thought I was the life of the party. So this was sort of laying the groundwork for a continual progression of my alcoholism, and initially, at least in the beginning, the reason that I started drinking and the reason that I progressed to a weekly drinker. And I only was a weekly drinker throughout high school and even in my first years of college. So on to OU. I had such a good time there visiting, I decided to take myself and my alcoholism there for 5 years. So I did fairly well in school my freshman and sophomore year at OU. This is the time when I started realizing consequences of my drinking. We were at a party on campus once, and of course I was overdoing it, just alcoholically drinking from early in the evening. And a friend of mine, a female, was there with us, and she was kind of getting to know a guy, and they were flirting a little bit, and I didn't think that he was good enough for her. So I made it a point to voice that to him, even though it was none of my business. So the alcohol always loosened me up and made me feel like I was fitting in, or at least able to talk to people and sort of socialize. But it also, on the other hand, made me a very mouthy and sort of confrontational person. I mean, look at me, I'm not a fighter. I can barely defend myself. And when I let him know he was not good enough for my friend, the next thing I know, I came to in a pile of bloody paper towels, and the ambulance was on its way. So he had knocked me out with one hit. He broke my nose in 3 places, fractured my eye socket, plastic surgery and whatnot followed. But that was the first sort of major consequence that I had directly related to my drinking. I also got my first DUI, thankfully first and only DUI, my senior year in college. Again, after a night of partying, I felt invincible and completely irresponsibly got behind the wheel and was pulled over and charged with DUI. I am not proud of the fact that I have driven hundreds of times under the influence. I've gotten behind the wheel countless times, and I am lucky that this DUI is the only consequence that I suffered because of my drinking and driving. It's hard to think about. Praise the Lord, I did not kill anyone or myself. Just another thing that has gotten me to where I am today. So that's how I have to think about it. And even though it is difficult, it's something that I never want to forget. So when I graduated from OU, I moved to a bigger city, and I quickly started moving up the ranks in the restaurant industry. I had worked at a particular restaurant my last year of college, and they sort of took me under their wing, and I ended up in a upper level management position. I did end up moving on to another company, and this company at the time was booming. They were growing rapidly, opening up restaurants in new cities and states, and after a few years in an upper management position, I was offered a role on the corporate training team. So I would travel to new cities and new states and help to open new restaurants, train the new staff, set up the kitchen, and usually end up staying for a few weeks after they open to make sure that things went smoothly. So this opportunity actually opened up a door for a multi-unit manager position in Maryland. So born and bred in Ohio, lived there my entire life, and this opportunity opens up in Maryland, where I know nothing about the environment. I know nobody there, but to me, in my head, this opportunity to sort of move and start fresh and have a clean slate was appealing. Now, at the time, thinking alcoholically, this was the best case scenario. I could sort of leave behind all of the messiness that I had created over the last couple years and, like I said, start fresh. So I did just that, and looking back, this was sort of the beginning of the end. Like I said, not knowing anyone in the state of Maryland was a recipe for disaster, because I quickly began to completely isolate myself and do nothing but take a few work calls each day, maybe pop in a restaurant once a week, but most importantly, and as my top priority, was drink from morning until night. And when I say from morning until night, I would wake up at 7 and not have coffee, but I'd have Chardonnay and drink pretty heavy for a couple hours, take a nap, wake up, drink heavy for a couple hours, and by the end of it there, I was drinking 2 of the large Magnum bottles of Chardonnay and a half pint of vodka every day. And for a small frame, that is absolutely ridiculous. And I began to have some health consequences. My blood pressure was through the roof. My cholesterol was outrageous because of all of the sugar I was drinking in the wine. Obviously, my sleep cycle was completely whacked, non-existent, really. And my body was just kind of screaming for help and sort of shutting down on itself. So about a year in to my Maryland residence, I started to have a headache, or a pinched nerve, is what I thought that it was. When you sleep on your neck wrong and you're like stiff for a day or two, that's what I thought that it was, and that's how it started. However, after 3 or 4 days, I started to think to myself, this is probably something a little more serious. And I wasn't quite ready to go to the doctor or to get it checked out, but internally I just knew that something wasn't right.